talk about
last night. Oops, let me grab mine. Over coffee. I love my coffee mug. My coffee mug says, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." Nehemiah 8:10. That's my theme scripture. Because sometimes you just get to have that internal joy when things are going crazy around you.
Yes. There you go. And mine says Taurus.
Yours always says the same thing.
So let's talk about last night. Last night was a very deep topic because we all struggling with this.
We do.
I think it took us a long time to come to this topic.
Mm-hmm.
This is a major struggle, and last night was very everybody was participating and had a lot of questions just because of the depth of what abandonment is.
Well, the topic for those of you guys that weren't there with us last night, it's abandonment, triggers, and wounds. And it's so, I think the deep thing that stood out for me when you got up and said, you can have abandonment and have both of your parents in the home.
Yeah.
That was like,
whoosh. Yeah.
Revelation.
That's the truth. So we can go through abandonment issues, and that's the right term, abandonment issues. And you can have both of your parents, you can have a full family, you can have tons of siblings, and still have that abandonment, have that sense of abandonment, and feel alone.
Right.
And last night we talked about abandonment is just the fear of loneliness, and it's something that it's an involuntary separation. Is that something that you don't plan for? And even when it's divorce, when you go through a divorce, even when both of the parts are going through the divorce, and you say you sign the paper and all that stuff, that you can have that abandonment issues just out of that divorce. So there's a lot of things that trigger the abandonment issues, and last night we talked about it. But before we went through all this, you talked you gave us the full novella, David.
Yes, I would talk to it. But before I even get into that, what you were just saying reminded me. I saw this on, I don't know, one of the social media things, and it said, "I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is ending up with the people who make you feel alone."
Yeah.
That's like abandonment. Just like it speaks to what you were saying. Like, yeah, you can have a house full of people, siblings and everything, and an intact family, and just feel very alone and abandoned.
So, you can be in a party and still feel alone.
Right. So where I took my text from, because, obviously those triggers and abandonment and all this stuff doesn't really show up in the Bible, but I took the text from 1 Samuel, which talks about the story of David. And everybody knows King David, a man after God's own heart, and serious warrior, killed bears and slayed Goliath, and all the stuff. He was amazing man of God, but he had issues. And for those of you who don't know, David was the youngest of 7 brothers. Well, okay, 8 altogether, including him. But he had 7 brothers over him. I always forget how to make that clear. And then he had 2 sisters that they don't really talk about a lot. But he was the youngest. And so, when we think about the youngest and culturally, they are the spoiled ones. They're the one that everybody dotes on. They're the one that, everything's about the baby. And David was kind of MIA, in his early years. When Saul, who was the king before David, when his anointing had been taken away from God, and Saul, God told Samuel, the prophet, go to the house of Jesse being David's father, go to the house of Jesse, there you'll find your next king. And so he goes and meets with the father. They have this big, to do, and bring your sons, because one of these is the king. And so, of course, the father starts with the oldest one. And he's like, no, that's not him. Starts with the next one. No, that ain't him either. So he goes through all 7 brothers, and Samuel's like, was there anybody else? And so the father's like, oh yeah, well, there's David, but he's out there tending sheep. He's the little brother. He's, just kind of really dismissed him. And I think that speaks to a lot. And it's like the dad never said okay, we need to have all my sons here. And none of the brothers would even say well, what about David, Dad? Don't you think he should be at the meeting or whatever? He was dismissed. And a lot of times I think in families, like what Lily was saying, we got a mother, we got a father, we got this big family dynamic. but you're dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think David was dismissed. And I think out of that, David kind of had this need for family. Even though he's the baby of like 7 brothers and 2 sisters, I don't know if they were older or younger. I don't know how they fit in with the thing. But anyway, there was a whole lot of people. And David is feeling alone. And, I've heard people, it's interesting. I've heard people that come from big families, and I don't. It's just my brother and myself, but people that are raised in big families that have an intact brothers and sisters, and they're like, no, we don't need no play cousins, we don't need no play brothers, we don't we don't need any of that stuff. Whereas me, I had brother, and grew up with a brother, had another brother on the East Coast, and I always wanted to have a sister, and mommy and daddy never brought me one, so everybody that I came in contact with was my sister, because I just really needed that. And I think David, even though he came from a big family, went out of his house with a void. He had a need for a father figure, and he had a need for family. And so then he gets um invited to Saul's kingdom, because David was a musician. Remember, he wrote most of the Psalms. In case y'all didn't know that, go through. You can learn a lot about David by reading his Psalms. And so he was a musician, and he was he was an armor bearer for the king. And then he began to develop this love for Saul, because he needed a father figure. And then the text even speaks of the fact that his father was much older, when in the time when Saul reigned. So, if he had like 8, 9, 10 kids above David, yeah, he probably was old and tired. So I think Saul looked a little bit younger. Yeah, David really like kind of gravitated towards him. And then his brother too. Not his brother. Saul had a son, Jonathan, and then David, and they literally became like brothers. So it's like David had 7 brothers, but then he partners with the king. And then as you kind of move through the novella of First Samuel, you're going to see how Saul began to become very jealous of David. David was very skilled. He was a skilled warrior. He could do music and whatever. And people were beginning to revere him in that. And Saul became very jealous. So clearly Saul was very dysfunctional. He was a very insecure leader. He was a very insecure man. Even his own 2 children turned against him. Jonathan, and then one of his daughters, the second daughter, Michal, she was the one that ended up marrying David. They both turned against their father in support of David. And so, and then Saul's kingdom, was beginning to tumble and whatnot. But I think the point is when you don't get what you need at home, or like that scripture says, when you have people around you, but you feel alone, you're going to go out seeking that and searching for that. And even though, as the story goes, and if y'all ever read through First Samuel, I'm going to tell you, First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Kings, Second Kings. If you want to find a really good novella, read through all 4 of those chapters. Because I'm telling you, you're gonna learn more than you want to know about the Old Testament. But it is fascinating because it was real. All those stuff, they're not just stories. That's real things that were building the kingdom all the way up to when Jesus Christ came along. And and so even when Saul began to try to kill David, David still had such a love for him. And see, we will do that in relationships. Any woman you've talked to, or even in man, because a lot of men are being abused now too, they'll keep going back, because what happens, and what Saul did, he tried to kill him, but then he'd turn around and call him my son and say how much I love you. Oh, I love you, son. Yes, may God be with you. God glorify everything you're doing. Then he flipped right around and tried to kill him again. And that's that abusive cycle. Yeah. I love you. Oh, that may God give you everything you need. And then and then that Satan starts talking to you again, and then you want to go out and kill. And that's what the cycle of abuse looks like. Right. And so a lot of times it's hard to pull away from what you need. In fact, our mentor has said oftentimes, you won't kill what you need. And David had 2 opportunities to kill Saul, and he didn't, because he had so much love for him as a father figure. So I think the point of the story is you've got to get whole before you get in a relationship. Otherwise, when you go, and I tell young ladies this all the time, when you go in with a need, you're already going to come up short. If you have a need that hasn't been fulfilled in your home, and you haven't allowed Jesus Christ to come in and fill that, you're going to get in something dysfunctional, just as broken as you are. Because Saul was very broken. Right. but David kept gravitating to him. So it was just a very, very interesting story. And then, of course, the story goes on when you get into, how David's kingdom began to tumble. It was, again, fruit of the poisonous tree.
Right.
Still like that dysfunctional when it comes to relationships with your kids and your wives and all that stuff. So it was just a very interesting story. It's fascinating. I hope you all go out and read the book.
Yes.
You can get it on Amazon.
Yes.
It's called the Bible.
The Bible. The novels of the Bible.
Exactly.
The novels of King David.
Exactly.
And that what shows is basically what you were saying. Dysfunction attracts dysfunction, and you won't fix that until you realize that you are the main dysfunctional one. Once you look at yourself and once you see what your struggles and your choices and why you're making the choices that you're making, then you're gonna be able to change it. Because then we talked about it last night too. Yes, at the end, David, he kind of got a hold of like what was happening, but later on, with the dysfunction continues. And that's we can all relate to this, and we call it novela because this happens in real life. This is exactly what is happening to most households when there's that's dysfunction, and that comes with the abandonment, and that's why it's so important to address it, because we see it with David, you see it with yourself. We make very poor choices. And then we resent those choices, but because we don't know because when we make those choices, we don't think, oh, I'm going to make this choice so I can make it all wrong and then regret it in 10 years from now. No, we make the choices that we make based on what we think is the best for us in that specific moment. The problem is when all you know is dysfunction, those choices are going to align with the dysfunction, thinking those are the best choices. But really understanding these classes and like talking about abandonment and talking about every communication and all the things that we've been talking about is to realize not to put a label on someone else. This is not about you. Oh yes, my husband is like this. Oh yes, my girlfriend is like that. No. It's how am I doing? Who am I? What are my choices, and why I've been making those choices, and really understanding why you make the choices that you make. And then based on that, be able to clarify that path and then make better choices now with the right knowledge and with clarity.
Yes,
because that's what we are looking for, to have clarity in order to make better choices. So talking about thank you about that was a deep story. It's how you turn it into a novella. I was like, what? And then David did what?
And Saul said
what? And then he didn't kill him. What? So it was very animated. But talking about abandonment, abandonment has many different reasons, but the bottom line and the majority of the people that suffers through abandonment issues is because of childhood. It's born in childhood, because we learn that very early. It's not something God didn't say, okay, you're going to have anxiety, bam, or you're going to suffer abandonment issues. No, it doesn't work like that. We are a product of our environment, and we learn that very early in life. And like we said earlier, it's not, you can grow up with all your family together with mom and dad and siblings and all that stuff, but that doesn't prevent you from having abandonment issues. And we're going to talk about a lot of them. So other than childhood traumas and how you were brought up, there's other things. I'm not going to touch those, but it's not necessarily because of your childhood. It can be environmental factors, it can be medical factors, genetics, and brain chemistry. That's a different all that to say, and it's important that I said this. If you have abandonment issues and you don't know where they come from, go and talk to someone that can help you to pinpoint. Because you probably had the best growing up and your parents together and be a happy family and still suffer abandonment issues. Go talk to a doctor. It might be a chemistry imbalance. On a side note, but talking about childhood growing up, and it's a childhood trauma is a great contributor for abandonment, fear of abandonment. So one of them, and I'm saying this is very important for me because I have kids. And one of them is nurturing, as parents, one of our major, or as a mother, major what I really focus on is really
Mm-hmm.
nurturing my kids so they grow up
Mm-hmm.
with a healthy mindset,
Right.
with
Right.
a mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest things that prevents or that contributes kids to suffer abandonment issues, or grown-ups to have abandonment
Mm-hmm.
issues, is not allowing the child to express themselves emotionally.
Right.
Don't cry.
Yes.
You don't have nothing to
Mm-hmm.
cry about.
Mm-hmm.
What you're crying is not valid.
Right.
Shut up and just eat your food.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
when they're
Right.
crying, especially because kids don't know how to express emotions.
Right.
As adults, we don't know how to express emotions. We don't
Exactly.
know how to communicate. So
Mm-hmm.
why do we expect a kid to tell you, oh yes, I'm feeling frustrated because my teacher didn't allow me to express
Yeah, they
myself
can't say
during
that.
class? They cannot say, they
They're not
cannot
gonna say
even
that.
say those words.
Right.
Even if you say those words, they will be like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So that's why. And then suppressing emotions is something, when we suppress someone emotions, what they're doing is putting it in and
Mm-hmm.
taking it in and taking it in and suppressing that. And what that does is one day it's going to explode.
Mm-hmm.
And they become emotional people.
Right.
And those emotions come out of nowhere. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to people and they start crying, and it's like, we're just having coffee. Why are you crying? What's happening right now? And that's that.
Yeah.
We suppress, we
Mm-hmm.
give permission to suppress their emotions.
Right.
And that's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying your emotions are bad.
Yeah.
Therefore, because you have emotions are bad, you're bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we start putting labels on ourselves very early based on the type of parenting that we have.
And that's what we do, because kids don't know. Kids don't know how to say, oh, they're just talking about my emotions, or they're just
Right.
talking about the
Or
food.
my behavior.
No.
Yes.
They understand, like, oh, see, if they're talking about that, it's because of me.
Mm-hmm.
So they internalize it, and it goes to an identity level.
Yes.
So it goes to, when it's a constant repetition of the same thing over and over and over and over, becomes a habit, and then the
Mm-hmm.
habit becomes a belief system.
Right.
And that belief system turns into an identity issue.
Right.
Where instead of saying what I did was wrong, it turns into I am wrong.
Right. Correct.
And nobody
Identity.
will love me because I'm wrong.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's a
Good
huge
point.
issue. Another
Mm-hmm.
one is ridicule a child. When there's
Mm-hmm.
a kid that has been bullied, more than likely he will turn
Mm-hmm.
either in a bully.
Yes.
That person would turn into a bully, or will have major abandonment issues,
Mm-hmm.
in which will think that people don't love them,
Right. Right. Right.
or
Yes.
there will never be enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing, and a lot of women suffer through that,
Yes.
thinking I have to overdo things so my husband can love me, because I feel I have the identity issue that I don't deserve it.
Right.
This is just major.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is put pressure on them to be perfect. That happens a lot. You didn't wash the dishes right, or your homework is you did why you have a C on the test.
Right. Right.
No,
Right. Right.
you didn't do it right. You have to do it again.
Right.
And you have to do it again. And that puts a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And that pressure turns into, I will never get that job. I will
Right.
never be good enough.
Right.
I will never do enough.
You will find yourself in these performance-based relationships,
Yes.
where you're performing for that person to get their approval.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm not a doctor, but I think a lot of those that mindset can lead to issues like OCD,
Stress, anxiety, depression.
Yeah, because it's just like, I got to get it perfect. I got to get it perfect. I remember the first time I didn't even understand what it was, but I experienced somebody that did have OCD. And we were at a dinner party at her house. And I mean, literally, as soon as everybody was cleaning, she's literally like picking up all the plates, cleaning, wiping everything. And like, we're still there, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, we're still here. We haven't left yet. And I'm just like, but I in hindsight, because it was actually somebody I worked with many years ago. And I'm like, oh, that was probably OCD. And for whatever reason, she just felt like the house had to look perfect.
Right.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. Yeah.
And see, you would think, what does that have to do with abandonment? It has a lot to do with abandonment. It's just something that it's an underlying issue, talking about the iceberg. It's an underlying issue that if you don't know, if you're not aware of it, everything on top is always going to remain the same. So really understand where you have those issues. And those become, and they can get worse. They can get worse with time if you're not capable to catch him, to see him. So that's a heavy issue. Stress, anxiety, depression comes from sometimes just abandonment issues. We will talk about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And another one was treat them like their peers. Kids need a structure. Kids don't need
Yes, we
freedom.
do.
And I'm gonna make it very clear. Kids don't need the freedom.
Right.
Kids need a structure, and they need discipline.
Yes.
To feel that everything is under control.
Right.
They okay, adults have control, so I don't have to worry about anything else. Because if there's not an adult under taking control of the situation, then the kids take control of the situation.
Right.
And that's when kids start parenting their parents. And that's when the parents come, it's like, oh, I have a boyfriend, what do you think about him? And the kids, and then the kids start talking to you like if they're an adult.
Right.
Or there's kids that they come with a job. Right. And they have there's parents that people that says, oh, I was the one that kept the house together because my parents were always doing other stuff and my siblings were all over the place, so I was the one cooking and I was the one making sure that everyone was taken care of.
Or what I've heard a lot of women say, I had a baby because I needed to be loved. So you done brought this child in the world with a job. When it's your job to love them, but you see now you're already that's from abandonment,
right?
You weren't loved as a child. You're gonna have something that you can call your own to love you unconditionally, and that's like highly toxic and dysfunctional.
Or you have a kid to keep a man.
Oh,
that's another
that's another class.
That's a total another different, but it's part of it.
Yeah,
and it's just like we think that by having a kid we're gonna hold. It's kind of like signing a commitment.
Right.
It's like
it's
like getting married.
Now we got something between us that I have to keep you connected, and a lot of us fall into that,
And he does, and that's not it.
And then even you mentioned last night about how sometimes single moms will want to become peers with their children, and it's kind of like there's one extreme or the other. There's that we're just buddies because you're guilt parenting, because the father didn't stay around for whatever reason, or we got divorced or whatever. But then there's guilt parenting, and then there's extreme parenting too, where the mom now feels like she got to make up for mom and dad not being there, and the kids are like, "Why are you so hard? Why are you so? Can you just tone it down a little bit?"
It's either you're too hard, or you're too like right there, or you just check out.
Yeah.
Like there's many different scenarios. Right. And no, what we need growing up is feel safe. That's part of the nurturing. And feeling safe is understanding or feeling that someone else has control of the situation that I don't have to worry about, but at the same time that there's a discipline and there's a structure. That's why it's important that we have a schedule.
Yes.
If you are the person that is all over the place running 100 miles per hour and just you don't finish one thing and then you jump on the other thing, it's just because you never learn structure.
Right.
And that's part of it. It's part of like an essential need that kids need to learn, to have a structure. That's why school always starts at the same time.
Right.
And that's why they always finish at the same time. And that's why kids have to go to bed at the same time to create consistency. They learn consistency and they learn discipline. And that's essential part of abandonment, so they don't fall into the abandonment issues.
Right.
So it's deep. This topic is so deep and it's so good.
It is deep. Yes. Man.
So it's important that if you want your kids, this is not about breastfeeding your kids until they turn 21. And I'm saying because I know that there's mothers that breastfeeding at their 19-year-old.
Yes, there's a problem.
It's a huge problem because if that's what you're doing, then you're the needy parent.
That's it.
You need your kids to take care of your emotionally of yourself.
Because you're not allowing that child to grow the way God has asked them to grow. I was sharing that with somebody recently about growing in things of the Lord. Like when we first come to Christ, we're infants. We're like on a bottle. In fact, Pastor Francis Chan does a great message on like baby Christians, because like he literally had a bottle and he's like sucking, but he said, and that's expected when you first enter the world. You're again born again, like just like a newborn baby is born. They can't do anything for themselves. Everything has to be done for them. And you carry them around, you breastfeed them, you burp them, you whatever. But then if that kid gets to be 5 and mommy is still carrying him on her hip and breastfeeding, that's a problem.
Right. If it's not party trained, it's a problem.
Yeah, so to put that spiritually, if you're 5 years down the road and you still look, act, sound, and talk the way you did before you got saved, that's a problem.
Yeah.
you're not growing.
Right.
And the whole point of spirituality is to grow.
Right.
You know, God wants to give you something new. He don't want you just to stay in the same
Right.
place. Because if you saw a mom carrying a child around at 5 and breastfeeding in public, which I know that has happened, you'd be kind of like,
Yeah, you look at them like they're crazy.
do I call child services? what do I do with this? You know?
Do I take you to an AA meeting?
Yeah.
What do I do with you? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but again, abandonment. Why is that happening? It's not the child.
No.
It's a need that the parent has that the child is fulfilling, and that's completely the wrong reason to bring a child in.
And the thing is, talking about generational sin, you're passing that neediness to your child.
Yes.
And then they will end up in a relationship like yours, and they will end up making the same decisions as yours, the same that you have made. So that's basically what you're planting.
It's really like emotional abuse.
Yes.
Because you're putting too much of your emotion, your need, your whatever on that child. Yes. Yeah, and then it's just dysfunctional.
And that's abandonment too.
It's abandonment.
You can be breastfeeding that kid until they turn 18, and you are abandoning them. Because you're fulfilling your emotional needs, not theirs.
Right. Because when they decide to leave, then you're going to feel abandoned all over again.
Yes.
Because you haven't dealt with the abandonment of your father, your husband who left, or whoever, you know. So yeah, it just creates a lot of dysfunction. I think that was the thing I kept pointing out with Saul and David, is that they had this dysfunctional love-hate relationship going on throughout their time together. It was broken. Saul was a very broken, insecure man. If you're very broken and insecure, how can you love somebody?
Right.
But the words would come out of his mouth. Oh, David, I love you. You're like a son to me. You're my son. No, he wouldn't say you're like a son. My son. He would call him my son. But then you're trying to kill him. Right. Those two things don't line up. But that's the brokenness of him. And then when we're broken, we're drawn to the brokenness of somebody else. And it's just this dysfunctional dance that we do, you know, all throughout the relationship.
It's a dysfunctional cycle. We talk about the cycle of despair last class. Yes. It's pretty much the same. It comes from somewhere, and that's why we are not able to come out of it.
Right.
So yes, thank you for saying that. So yeah, let's get it going, and let's get it really understanding. Practice self-awareness, not on your husband, but on yourself. That's where we start. So the signs of fear of abandonment. Okay, signs. Are you a people pleaser?
Oh, you're talking to me? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Talk to the audience.
So people pleaser, and I said it last, because I've been hearing like people carries that I'm a people pleaser, like a badge of honor. I'm a people pleaser.
Blessed. Yeah. I'm a blessed people pleaser.
I hear that more often than I should. And that's just, and it's not good. If you're a people pleaser, you can be proud of it, but that's not something to be proud of. No. It's really something to work on, because people pleaser is being codependent.
Yes.
You're just depending on someone else's emotional availability to help you.
Right.
Yes. And that's trouble. That's a big problem. So if you're a people pleaser, really look into where does that come from.
Yes.
And what problems that has caused you in the past.
Yes.
Because it's not a good thing.
No, it's not. And I can testify, whatever. I have been a huge people pleaser most of my life. You know, and the thing that throws you off, like you say, people wear that with like a badge of honor, because the things you're doing are very good.
Yes.
They're not mean-spirited. You're really trying to help that person.
But it's just essentially you're just trying to help yourself.
But the motivation is wrong. And then when I learned years ago that codependency is rooted in control, that's not a good thing. Because it's like you're literally trying to manipulate a situation, manipulate a person to get a response that you need to make you feel loved. Again, abandonment.
Right.
Deal with your abandonment issues. Get in a healthier relationship.
So yes, so these signs that I'm going to mention is, if you find yourself thinking like that or feeling that way, that's just a sign of abandonment issue. It's for you to write it down and then think, okay, where do I think that comes from? Really looking into yourself and doing work going through that process of self-awareness. So it's to pay attention on these signs. Another one is separation anxiety. When your husband goes to work and you start stressing or you start drinking and you don't know if he's going to come back. It's like it used to happen before in old times when he's like, my husband went to buy cigarettes and 20 years
Right?
later he never came back.
The kids are graduating college and we still haven't seen him.
It's like, where is your husband? Oh, he went to buy cigarettes
Right.
20 years ago.
Right.
So that happens, and that creates separation anxiety
Yes,
when you start,
yes.
when you don't know if that person is going to come back.
Right.
Or like that happened to a lot of the wives when their husbands went to war,
Right.
or when they were soldiers, or they were in the army. That happens a lot.
Mhm.
So if that's a big issue too.
Yeah.
Another one is quickness to move on, to ensure that you don't get too attached. So basically, it's that person that says, "Oh, we had time, we have a good time, but not thank you," and then they ghost you and they don't text you again, or you never heard of them again, and you text them, and you never see them again because they don't know how to cope with someone needing them, and they're like, before this gets too much, I cut you off because I don't know how to deal with that, because I'm afraid that then you are going to abandon me. So I'll abandon you before we get too close.
And let me ask you something. Do you think, and it's no diss to the younger generation, because it is just the world you have grown up on with computer and phone and Snapchat and all that other stuff. But in fact, that generation coined the word ghosting, which was something like, somebody my age would be like, what? You didn't say anything? You just stopped? You just cut them off? Like there was no conversation? So do you think it's because so much of the world we live on it lacks relationship and intimacy? It makes it easy to be like, boop, to be so that easy. Person that just like ghosts you and like, well, I met him online, so I'll never see him again.
Yeah, so it's now because our best friends is those little machines.
Right.
We turn this into our best friend. And then we are there. And it's easy. We're finding ways to get people to look to us.
Right.
But then it's easy for us to say, well, I don't have really a connection with that person because I don't really know you.
Yes.
So it's easy for me to block you.
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, that happens with people that we talk and then have a conversation. And it's like, you see that person that it gets too close to you, or is really, really liking you, and you feel so insecure to say, what if I really like him?
Yes.
And then what if he leaves? Because I'm so used to that everybody's going to leave me. What if he leaves me too? So no, it's too much for me to think about. So I prefer to cut him off.
Right. And just to clarify, no diss to the young people, because I see people my age having conversation by text, having arguments by text, and I will call you out in a minute and say, you know what? We grew up with one phone and a busy signal. You are way too old to be trying to be text, no conversation. So I'm not blaming all the young people because it's affecting us too. Those of us that are a little older than 30.
We abuse the tools. We don't use them, we abuse them.
Right.
We use them to manipulate and take control of a lot of situations. And that's part of the control. So that the way of saying, I control the relationship. I tell you when you can talk to me and when not.
Oh yeah, that came up last night. Yes. Oh my goodness, that was so funny to me, because it's kind of like, now that everything is at a touch of a button, you can see who's calling and whatever, and now you're sitting here making a decision like, should I answer that? Should I swipe? So no, if it rings a couple of times and then you swipe, they're like, oh, they really don't want to talk to me. They saw it was me and they just swiped me. So it's like, it leaves you with this kind of limbo until the person gets back. And then we actually hear some of the ladies saying, well, you know what? I called them and they weren't available. So now I see them calling back. Now I'm not going to be available. Yes. It's funny, but it's like, that is how we're starting to think, because we're so disconnected. Again, abandonment.
And even to open a text.
Yes!
Because now people can see when they read it, so they prefer not even to open the text and read it.
Right.
Because if I open the text and I read it, then they're gonna know that I read it.
Right.
And then and that's taking control of the situation. It's like, just read the text and answer what is happening. You're not gonna die for reading a text. But this is, we are so prompt to we project our emotions on other people. So this is what we do. We say, if I read the text, they're going to think that I'm ignoring them. And the other person can be like, oh, whatever. They don't even look at the phone or whatever. They make it like they're people that are really, even though there's just few people, but there's people that really, they move on with their life. They have other
Yes.
they have kids and they have other priorities
Right,
to focus
right.
their life on. They're not like, oh my god, they look at the text. It doesn't happen like that. But an emotionally insecure person would project their emotions in other people.
That's true.
And that's why
very
they're
true.
like, they have to answer the text right away.
Right.
They have to pick up the call right away because they think if they don't, the other person is gonna get hurt.
Right.
Which what they're only doing is protecting themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and like I said, the world makes it very easy to disconnect to protect my heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another one is feeling insecure and unworthy of love, which that's
speaks for itself.
Yes. Quick to attach to emotionally unavailable partners. If you are an emotionally insecure person, you will get attached to an emotionally unavailable person.
That's it.
Simple.
That's it.
Plain and simple.
That's real.
Because we are trying to get that. We are attracted to the opposite.
And a lot of it is because we don't know what intimacy and being in a connected, intimate family looks like. So you go for what's familiar. You don't know. It's so deep and so subconscious because I think God has put in us the need and desire to be loved, which is why he is love, because he knew that we were all going to come from flawed families and that we were going to need something greater than us to pour back into us because of what we missed growing up. And he knew that there would be split families, divorced families, kids born out of wedlock, kids that would never know their fathers, mothers, whatever. And that's why he's here. But if you don't know what an intimate relationship looks like, you're going to go out and get exactly what's familiar to you, which is a lack of intimacy.
Right. So it's common. It's a pattern. So find your pattern there.
Right.
And what you were saying, difficulty achieving emotionally intimacy. Emotionally intimacy is not telling someone else, everybody else, your business and how you feel and crying with them. It's not like that. Emotionally intimacy is really recognizing what's in you and being open to talk to safe people, not to everybody, to safe people, to your partner or your spouse, or and saying, you know, what you said hurt me. And it hurt me because my background or because of trauma, and you just trigger me for my abandonment issues. That's being emotionally intimate, intimate. Really being open to express your emotions in a safe place. Not expecting that person to say, "Oh, poor you, poor you." It's not about that. It's really having that openness for the other person to just hear you out, without expecting a response. That's the bottom line. Another one is not easy to commit. If you are not easy, it's hard for you to commit, especially in relationships or even to a job.
Yes.
When they said, okay, so sign even to your phone. Like, I don't want to sign contracts. Okay, why do you don't like signing contracts? So it sometimes is like, oh no, I don't like sign. I don't want to go to AT&T because they're gonna make me sign a contract.
Right.
Sometimes that sounds silly, but that has an underlying issue. Just
that's interesting, and it can be the lack or that inability to commit can be for something super small.
Yep.
Like, you want to go out for lunch Tuesday or Wednesday?
Yes.
I don't. Well, Tuesday I have. Okay, so Wednesday's. Well, I don't. And it reminded me of one of the young ladies last night was saying how when she's afraid to answer the phone when she sees her boss calling because she knows he's going to put a requirement on her, and so she's afraid that he'll bulldoze his way into making her commit, and so she's afraid to, and then she'll text him back or whatever. It's like we need to give ourselves permission to commit either way.
Right.
Like the word says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, and it doesn't make you a bad person if the answer is no. Because you have to make it about you and protect yourself. Look, because I'm going to tell you, a boss or anybody, they're going to try to get 110% and then some.
Yeah.
If they can have you working 7 days a week and it wasn't against the law, they do that. So you have to be willing to put yourself first and say, you know what? Love to help you out, but I have XYZ or ABC, or I'm not doing anything and I just needed that time for myself.
Yep. Simple.
And be okay with that.
Yes, and don't feel bad about it, because that's what it is. You're going to feel bad about it. It's like, oh, and what if
the guilt,
and what if this, and the worry and the guilt. We talk about that last the pride, the worry, the guilt, the fear, and all that stuff starts kicking in. Hypersensitivity to criticism. If you grow up with people telling you have to be perfect,
Right.
growing up, if someone tells you, oh, that nail is chipped, you're gonna be like, oh my god, and make a big deal out of little simple
And
things.
then you're gonna think that everybody can see it,
Right.
nobody can see it, and no one's even looking for it, but
Yeah.
it's gonna freak you out. And I can relate to that, because when you're hypersensitive, it's just what you said. It's because you were taught to be perfect, and those people become codependent people pleasers
Yeah.
because they got to do everything right, and then they get very butthurt if they're corrected, because in their minds, what they hear. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today about hearing with a critical ear. It's like you hear, it's what they're trying to do is correct, but you hear criticism,
Right.
and so you're immediately offended. Offensive ear, that's what she
Right.
said, listening with an offensive ear. You're immediately going to defense mode.
Right.
Because, and they were just like, okay, well, I just said it, they're trying to help you at work. Well, if you do it this way, it'll work out better for you. But I've been doing it this way for 10 years. You go into this major in defense of me
Right.
mode, and it's like, okay, it's not an attack on you.
Right.
I'm just trying to show you a better way to do this.
Right.
Yeah, but we are, put myself in that category, we are hypersensitive. In progress. Work in progress, always.
So that's another sign. And attention-seeking behaviors, which continuously texting, or throwing tantrums, or crying out of nowhere for people to come and say, "Oh, what's wrong?" We do that a lot. You see someone, a lot of people does that too, when they're just pouting in the corner, and people notice. People that are hypersensitive, they will notice when someone is codependent. It's like, oh, what's wrong with you? And then they try, but essentially what they're doing is manipulating the situation to get emotional support.
And guess what the codependent is going to do? I'm going to help you fix your problem in order that you will, in kind, return that friendship or that favor at some point. It's just, again, this dysfunctional dance. They're manipulating you into paying attention to them. We're manipulating them into loving us. It's just this whole dysfunctional dance that we do because of abandonment.
Yes.
Going back to the original topic. Yes.
Throwing tantrums and outbursts. If you're a Karen, there you go. I'm calling it out. Overly needy, relying on people to cover emotional needs. The same thing. And addictions. If you have any type of addiction, it might be abandonment issues. Pay attention to that. And controlling. Bottom line is you're trying to control manipulative behaviors. When we do things, we cry to get a response, that's controlling. We get angry to get a response, that's controlling. We get quiet to get a response, that's controlling. We walked away from situations, that's like you tap out, that's a way of controlling. Or don't do that because that's how she is. No, we tiptoe around people because that's the way people do take control of situations. They do things, and then we say, oh no, I'm not going to do that because then I'm going to trigger them, and then they're going to walk away. That's their way of controlling manipulation. And that's part of the abandonment issues as well.
And it's so interesting too. And I know Lily was explaining this earlier about don't look at this list and look at your spouse or look at your partner, whoever, and say, oh, that's you, that's you, that's you, that's you. But I think what is interesting, because I think you can't help but do this, especially if you're married. And I'll just say for myself, you've heard, she was going through the list. You heard a couple of mine, not all of the ones that I have struggled with in the past or may even still be struggling with now. But the interesting part for me was that whatever I am, my husband is the opposite. So it's still, and they're all rooted in abandonment. So it's kind of like, it's good to be aware of it, but not to go home and point it out and say, oh, by the way, you are this, and this, So I think, be clear that it's good to be aware of the dance that you and your spouse are doing. But again, because you're here and you're listening, this is for you.
Yes. It's kind of like you're arguing with your husband, and he's like, yes, I heard it in class.
Right.
You are an avoidant attachment style. That's who you are.
That's you.
And then the other person would be like, what are you talking about? So this is not about pointing fingers. This is about really having awareness.
Yes.
Opening up your eyes and say, oh, this is what is happening. Yes. So yes, it's okay to say, oh yes, I can see that in my mom, or I can see that in my husband, or I can see that in people. Yes. just don't call it out.
Right.
Because I was like, what are you talking about?
You.
Yeah, this is for you to do the work and really understanding where you are and where your spouse is, because you know better, obviously, but not to put a label on them.
Right.
That's the key. So and there's coping mechanisms to
you want to do this now?
no, actually, yes. So this is what I want to do. Now that you have the signs, and now that we talk about all this, what abandonment really is, do your homework, practice self-awareness, and then start doing your homework, right? Start doing where you are and where do you think that comes from.
Yes.
We're going to do part 2
Absolutely.
in a couple of weeks. So we're going to do second part for abandonment triggers and wounds. And we're going to talk about the styles of attachment, the coping mechanisms that we adapt in ourselves to cope with the abandonment, issues. But we're gonna address this in
Absolutely,
in the next session.
Definitely. This is just so heavy. I mean, it is deep, and it's not something we want to rush through. It's kind of like the forgiveness topic. We could do the next 30 years on forgiveness, but we won't. Yes. But this is a deep one because it really, like what Lily said, it's about self-awareness.
Right.
And then so that you can begin to correct those things. Now, some of the things that I see that I point out in myself, they're not as big of an issue as they were perhaps when I first got married 20 years ago. But there's still areas where I can improve. And I think that's the whole point. It's it's ongoing growth, maturing as a person, maturing in the things of God. And and it's ongoing until Jesus comes home, basically. Yes. Yeah, so this is exciting. We want you guys to tune back in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
We really love it if you join us in person. We'll be meeting 2 weeks from yesterday, whatever that date will look like, in person, and then we'll be coming back to you in a couple of weeks with the rest of this.
So next session, we were going to talk about the insecure attachment styles.
Yes.
And the real abandonment triggers. What are the triggers? How they look like. Right. So you learn to pinpoint them and then catch yourself when you're going through them. So that's what we're going to be talking about next session. But in the meantime, do your homework and do self-evaluation. Practice self-awareness and really find what's your abandonment style. What are the signs that you show as abandonment issues, and where do you think that comes from?
Right.
And write it down and then work on it. So when we talk about the styles attachment, then you can be like, oh yes, for real, this is what it is. Oh yes,
very good.
You're going to have more emotional intelligence to deal with them and really to understand them better.
Absolutely.
That's what it is.
This has been great.
This is great.
Yes, high five.
Yes, we did it. We did it.
We did it. We did it. We did it.
So you guys tune in, and this was great. Again,
stay blessed.
Let's do it. Bye-bye.